The alarms were still screaming when I saw her walk toward the tree line. My name is Vect. I am a field scout for the Coalition Survey Division, and in 9 cycles of service I had never seen a living being step into the flame forest on purpose, not once. Not even the bravest soldiers from the hardest worlds. The forest killed everything that touched it, and it did so in under 4 minutes. I had the burn logs to prove it. I had watched the recordings during training, grainy footage of scouts collapsing into ash before they could even scream. So when the proximity sensors on my wrist unit shrieked and I turned to see a human woman walking calmly past the warning markers, my first thought was that she had lost her mind. Her name was Nora Bell. She was a supply technician assigned to our joint outpost on the planet designated Ver 9, a damp, green world with 2 moons and 1 very deadly forest that glowed faintly orange at night. The glow was not decoration. It was warning. Every plant in that forest carried a defensive compound that reacted violently with the biochemistry of nearly every known species in the Coalition. Silicon-based skin blistered on contact, ammonia-based lungs seized within seconds of breathing the spores. My own people, the Threll, carbon-based like humans but with a very different enzyme structure, had lost 11 scouts to that forest before the zone was sealed permanently. There were signs everywhere. Signs in 6 languages, translated into pictographs for species that could not read any of them. A stick figure catching fire, a skull with flame lines rising from it. It was the most obvious warning system the Coalition had ever built, because after the first 3 deaths, nobody wanted to take chances with subtlety. And Nora Bell walked past every single one of those signs without slowing down. I dropped my scanner and ran after her, shouting into my comlink at the same time, calling for a response team, calling her name, calling anyone who would listen. She did not stop. She did not even look back. She had a rope coil over one shoulder and a flashlight in her hand, and she moved with the calm, unbothered pace of someone walking to a supply closet, not someone walking into a death trap. "Stop," I shouted, my translator crackling with the effort of keeping up. "That forest kills everything. You will not survive contact with the spores." She glanced at me over her shoulder, and there was no fear on her face. None, just mild irritation, like I was interrupting something important. "My friend's kid wandered in there chasing a lizard," she said. "I'm getting him out." Then she stepped over the last warning marker and disappeared between the first row of glowing trees. I stood at the edge of the tree line with my heart pounding against my ribs, watching the orange light shift and ripple as she moved deeper in. Every part of my training told me to wait for the response team, to seal the perimeter, to prepare for a recovery operation that would only bring back what was left of her. I had seen what the forest did to flesh. I had seen the reports. There would not be much left. But there was also a boy in there, a child, and somehow that made it worse to just stand and watch. I activated my suit's external scanner, hoping to at least track her heat signature so we would know where to search once this was over. The scanner picked her up immediately, a small human shape moving steadily through the undergrowth, weaving between trunks that dripped faint orange sap onto the mossy ground. I watched the readout with my breath caught somewhere behind my teeth, waiting for the moment her vital signs would spike and then flatline. The same pattern I had seen in every training simulation. It did not come. Her heart rate was elevated, sure, from exertion and worry, but it was steady. Her body temperature was normal. There was no sign of the violent chemical reaction that should have already been eating through her skin. I checked the scanner twice, convinced it was malfunctioning, because nothing that walked into that forest should still be reading as calm and alive 3 minutes later. "Bell, do you copy?" I said into my comm, forgetting for a moment that she likely did not have a translator tuned to my frequency. To my surprise, her voice came back clear. "I copy. Little busy right now. Your vital signs. They are stable. Are you experiencing any burning? Any pain? Difficulty breathing?" There was a pause, and I could hear leaves rustling, branches snapping under careless footsteps. "No," she said, sounding genuinely confused by the question. "Why would I be?" I did not have an answer for her, because I did not have an answer for myself. By then, the response team had arrived behind me, a mix of Threll soldiers and 2 Coalition officers from the observation post, all of them staring at the same readout I was staring at. Captain Aurel Vantik, my direct commanding officer, pushed past me to the edge of the tree line, his 4 eyes narrowing as he studied the scanner data over my shoulder. "That cannot be correct," he said. "Recalibrate it." "I already did, sir. Twice." "Then the forest is not reacting to her." "It appears that way, sir." He was quiet for a long moment, watching the orange glow pulse deeper in the trees where Nora Bell's heat signature continued moving without any sign of distress. I could see the disbelief on his face, the same disbelief I felt sitting heavy in my own chest. Because everything we had been taught about this forest, every warning sign, every burn log, every dead scout, told us this should not be possible. "Get eyes on her," Vantik said finally. "Send a drone in. I want visual confirmation before I believe a scanner reading." We launched a small recon drone, one built to withstand the forest's toxic spores just long enough to gather footage before its casing degraded. It buzzed past me and into the tree line, weaving low through the glowing branches, and within 30 seconds we had a live feed on the display panel. There she was, Nora Bell, crouched beside a fallen log, gently pulling a crying boy out from underneath it. The boy's clothes were torn and his face was streaked with tears and dirt, but he was breathing, moving, alive. And around them both, the orange sap dripping from the branches overhead glistened in the drone's spotlight, some of it landing on her bare forearm as she lifted the boy into her arms. Nothing happened. No blistering, no smoke, no screaming. She simply wiped the sap off on her trouser leg like it was rainwater, and started walking back the way she came, the boy clinging to her neck, his sobs quieting now that he was no longer alone. I watched that footage 3 times before I fully believed it. My mind kept waiting for the moment the reaction would begin, some delayed chemical process that would catch up to her the second she stepped back into open air. But when she emerged from the tree line 4 minutes later, boy in her arms, warning markers behind her, she looked exactly as she had when she walked in. Calm, mildly annoyed, completely impossibly fine. The boy's mother came running from the outpost, screaming his name, and Nora simply handed him over like she had just carried in a crate of supplies, not walked through what every scanned species in the Coalition considered a guaranteed death sentence. "You are certain you feel no pain?" Vantik said to her, stepping forward with his scanner raised, running it over her arms, her face, her exposed skin. "No burning, no irritation, nothing at all?" Nora looked down at her arm, where a smear of orange sap had already dried into a faint sticky residue, and shrugged. "It's a little sticky," she said. "Might need soap, that's about it." Vantik stared at his scanner readout for a long moment, and I watched something shift behind his 4 eyes. A kind of quiet unraveling of everything he thought he understood about this planet, this forest, and possibly about humans in general. "This is not possible," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. "It's just a forest," Nora said, already turning to walk back toward the outpost, rubbing the sap off her arm with a rag someone handed her. "A little glowy, sure. Smells kind of sweet, actually." She said it so plainly, so without drama, that I found myself questioning whether she even understood what she had just done. To her, it seemed, the flame forest was simply a patch of unusual plants with a strong smell, nothing more. That night, our science team pulled every scrap of data we had on the forest's chemical defenses and began comparing it against everything we knew about human biology. I sat in on the analysis with Vantik and 2 of our senior researchers, a Threll biochemist named Yasa Kaur, and a Coalition liaison officer whose name I never quite learned to pronounce correctly. The forest's defense mechanism, we already knew, worked by releasing a reactive compound the moment it detected foreign biological contact. That compound was designed, evolutionarily speaking, to interact violently with a very specific range of enzyme structures, the kind found in silicon-based skin, ammonia-based tissue, and even in most carbon-based species within the Coalition, including my own. Human biochemistry, it turned out, simply did not fall within that range. "Their enzymes are structured differently," Yasa explained, pulling up a comparison chart on the display screen. "The compound the forest releases is essentially a key built to fit a very specific lock. Human biology is not that lock. It is not even close to that lock. The forest is not failing to react to her. It is reacting exactly as it always does. The reaction simply produces no effect on human tissue. So the forest was never dangerous to humans at all," Vantik said slowly, as if testing the sentence for cracks. "Not this forest," Yasa said. "Not this compound. It is entirely possible other hazards on this planet, or others, would still affect them. But this specific threat, the one that has killed 11 of our scouts and injured dozens more across a dozen colonized worlds, appears to be completely irrelevant to human physiology." I sat back in my chair, trying to absorb what that meant. For as long as the Coalition had studied this planet, the flame forest had been treated as one of the deadliest known biomes in our cataloged space, a place so dangerous that entire survey teams had been reassigned rather than risk further losses. And this entire time, an unassuming supply technician could have walked through it collecting berries if she felt like it. "Does she know?" I asked. "Does she understand what she actually did today?" Vantik shook his head slowly. "I do not believe she has any idea. To her, it seems, this was simply a walk through some trees to retrieve a child. I found her the next morning at the outpost's small mess hall, sitting alone with a cup of something steaming, staring out the window toward the tree line where the forest's orange glow had faded into ordinary green under daylight. I approached carefully, still half expecting the events of yesterday to somehow catch up with her, some delayed reaction that had simply taken longer to manifest. "May I sit?" I asked. She gestured to the seat across from her without looking away from the window. "Sure. I wanted to ask you something," I said, settling into the chair. "Yesterday, when you walked into the forest, were you not afraid? Even a little?" She considered the question for a moment, turning her cup slowly between her hands. "I was afraid I wouldn't find him in time," she said. "I was afraid he'd be hurt somewhere I couldn't reach. But the forest itself?" She shrugged again, that same casual gesture I had seen the day before. "Nobody ever told me it would hurt me specifically. Everyone just said it was dangerous. Dangerous is a big word. Dangerous to what? Dangerous how? Nobody could actually answer that when I asked. The scanners showed it kills nearly every known species on contact." "Every known species you've tested," she said, and there was no arrogance in the correction, just a simple observation. "Had anyone actually tested it on a human before yesterday?" I opened my mouth to answer and then closed it again, because the honest answer was no. Nobody had. The forest had been sealed off and marked as forbidden the moment the first Threll scout collapsed inside it, decades before humans had even joined the coalition. The warning signs had been translated into every language available, human languages included, simply as a precaution, an assumption that whatever killed one species would likely kill another. Nobody had ever considered that the assumption itself might be wrong. "We assumed," I admitted quietly, "we assumed the danger applied universally." Nora nodded slowly, like that confirmed something she had already suspected. "That happens a lot, I think. People, or whatever species, see something scary happen to someone else, and they just carry that fear along without ever checking if it actually applies to them. I get it. It's safer that way most of the time. But sometimes it just means everyone's scared of something that was never actually coming for them in the first place." I sat with that for a long moment, turning the words over in my mind, thinking about the 11 scouts we had lost, about the decades of warning signs, about an entire species of trees that had been feared across a dozen worlds for a danger that, to humans, simply did not exist. "You could have died," I said finally. "You had no way of knowing for certain that you would be unaffected." "No," she agreed. "I didn't know for certain. But there was a kid in there, and waiting around to be certain felt like the wrong call." She took a sip of her drink and set the cup down. "Sometimes you don't get to be certain. You just have to decide what matters more." Word of what happened spread quickly through the outpost, and within days, requests began coming in from other coalition research stations, wanting samples of human biochemistry data, wanting to understand exactly why the flame forest's legendary danger simply evaporated when it came to one particular species. Yasakor spent the following weeks running deeper analysis, eventually publishing findings that confirmed what we had already suspected. Human enzyme structures, shaped by a completely different evolutionary path than most coalition species, were simply incompatible with the specific reactive compounds found in Ver9's forest ecosystem. It was not immunity, not exactly. It was closer to being invisible to a threat that had never been built with them in mind. The forest itself did not change. It remained exactly as dangerous as it had always been to Threll scouts, to silicon-based colonists, to nearly every other species that called the coalition home. The warning signs stayed up, and rightfully so, because the danger was real for most of us. But for humans, an entire chapter of feared territory had quietly become nothing more than a forest, with pretty orange light and a slightly sweet smell. I found myself thinking often about that conversation in the mess hall, about the way Nora Bell had described fear as something people carried without always checking if it belonged to them. It stayed with me long after the science team finished their reports and moved on to other projects, long after the boy she rescued grew comfortable enough to wave at her across the outpost courtyard every morning. Weeks later, our survey team was assigned a new region on the far side of Ver9, an area the Coalition database listed as unexplored due to reported atmospheric instability. The warning in the file was old, filed by a scout team that had turned back decades earlier after their instruments detected dangerous pressure fluctuations near the region's edge. Nobody had gone back to verify it since. Nobody had questioned whether the original warning had ever actually been tested properly, or whether it had simply been accepted and passed down the way the flame forest's reputation had been. Standing at the edge of that new, unexplored region, staring at old warning markers even more faded than the ones back at the forest, I found myself doing something I would not have done a month earlier. I ran a fresh scan instead of simply trusting the archive data, and when the readings came back clean, showing no actual instability at all, just a decades-old sensor malfunction that had never been corrected. I understood a little more clearly what Nora Bell had meant. Fear, once it takes root in a species, in a culture, in an entire coalition of worlds, has a way of becoming its own kind of truth, repeated so often that nobody thinks to question where it actually came from. It gets copied into files, translated into warning signs, passed down through generations of scouts and soldiers who never think to ask whether the danger that killed someone else was ever actually built for them. I still do not fully understand humans. I do not think I ever will, not completely. Their willingness to walk into unknown danger for the sake of someone else, without waiting for certainty, without waiting for permission, remains something my own culture views as reckless bordering on incomprehensible. But I no longer see it purely as recklessness. I have come to understand it as something closer to a different kind of caution, one measured not by how dangerous something appears from the outside, but by what it actually costs to find out the truth. The flame forest still glows orange every night on Ver 9, still carries its ancient chemical defenses against threats that, for most of us, remain very real. But somewhere within its trees, there is a path now, worn slightly into the moss, left behind by a woman who never once believed the forest was hers to fear. And every time I walk past those warning signs now, I remember to ask myself a simple question before accepting the fear they represent. Dangerous to what, exactly? Dangerous to whom? Sometimes the answer changes everything.